Now, coming to today, CXO panel, as Sundi mentioned, this is something that 4 years back the board had decided. We started conceptualizing this. We actually wanted to make this literally a massive CXO panel type of an event, and we will take it there next year under Pallavi's leadership as Pallavi takes over as president. But again, between me, Pallavi, Sundi, and the GovCon committee, we were still able to pull off this CXO panel day, which is today, right? Thank you. Having said that, let me do this. Let me kick off the first CXO panel. Unfortunately, because of this hybrid situation, we've been testing since morning, but we are running 5 minutes late. We do have some government panelists already in the green room, so I'm going to go ahead and invite them live, and I'm going to start the panel. And then we can have a discussion. We are all here, the GovCon committee is here, and we can definitely brainstorm with you all further as to how we can take this concept much, much larger than what it is today. So with that, can I request all our panelists to come live? So here's our panel. So welcome. All right, so first and foremost to all the panelists, our sincere apologies. I know we are running 5 minutes late. We were having some technical issues, so we started about 5 minutes late. But then we are so honored to have you all be part of this panel. And unfortunately, it is a completely virtual panel. We did have a few folks who were supposed to come here, and we had arranged for it to be like a live stream. It did not matter whether you were here on stage or on Zoom. We were kind of combining everything. But then, we had to go virtual for whatever reason. So with that, I'm going to step back and I'm going to have our esteemed panelists introduce themselves. So Keith, let me start with you. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Keith Bluestein, the Chief Information Officer at the Small Business Administration, and look forward to talking with the other panelists here about some of the things that we're doing and how we hope that the membership of the TIE DC group here can help us move forward over the next few years.
Thank you, Keith. So Robin, I'll go with you next.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I just took the role of the CIO at the OPM OIG's office. Prior to that, I was at the National Gallery of Art and the EPA in CTO and CIO role. So I'm looking forward to sharing what we have seen. And once again, thanks for having me on the panel.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you very much for being here. Rajiv, I'll go with you next.
Great. Thank you so much. Very happy to be here at TIE DC. I think this is my second time. I was here the first year that you guys did this. Again, my name is Rajiv Upal, and I'm the CIO at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So very glad to be here.
Welcome, Rajiv. So, and last but not the least, Alistair, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Alistair Thompson. I serve as the Chief Information Officer at the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute at the NIH. It's really good to be with you. I've missed doing these things, but as you can imagine, we've been a little bit busy over the last 18 months or so. So it's really great to be here and have the time to do this.
Thank you. And again, once again, welcome everyone. And I know Rajiv and Keith both have supported TIE in the past. So thank you for that. And so what we're going to do is have a conversation. So as you see, we have very senior leaders from the government, CIOs, CTOs, CTIOs. So we wanted to kick off today's day talking about emerging trends in the GovCon or in general in the industry, right? So emerging trends, innovation and opportunities. That's what the whole day is about. The second panel is also going to focus on that. With that, let me start on emerging trends. Of course, digital modernization, transformation, that's been at the top of the list. It actually accelerated significantly after the pandemic. Surprisingly, the whole workforce modernization, going digital, it just accelerated. Of course, cloud adoption, and there are so many emerging trends that have probably been at the top of the list for all these CIOs and CTOs. So let me start with Rajiv. Rajiv, you, I know CMS has been probably one of the largest adopter of cloud. So if you can share a little bit more, information about your cloud adoption journey and how you're taking CMS through the transformation process.
Sure. Thank you. So yes, you're right. I think outside of the DoD, In the civilian sector, we probably do have the largest cloud infrastructure. And over the past, I would say 2+ years, we've been focusing on automation on the cloud side. That's one of the things we focused on. It used to be that when somebody wanted to provision cloud services, it would take a few weeks before they would have it. By using automation, I think we are down to now 48 hours. So from the time you request a VPC, within 48 hours, you should have it. The other thing that we are focusing on is creating infrastructure as a service and platform as a service so that our vendor partners, when they're building systems for us, they don't have to focus on the DevSecOps. They don't need to build a CI/CD pipeline. Those are things that we provide. The goal here is how do we make the whole idea of getting an ATO, how do we make that as quick as possible so that when you use a platform we provide, you don't need to worry so much about the ATO because we will take on a lot of that burden so that the amount of work you need to do for the ATO is significantly reduced. So that's part of the work we are doing on the cloud side. There are many other things, work on the data mesh, things on our investing in our workforce, upskilling them. So a number of other things that we focus on beside the cloud, I mean. So that's in a couple minutes what I would say where we are.
From a cloud adoption perspective, and of course, there has been heavy investments. I know there was a time when the agencies did not want to move to cloud, and now suddenly we have this whole rush of everyone moving to the cloud. Actually, it has become a commodity. With that, I know, Keith, when we were talking last week, you had mentioned that there's one thing to move to the cloud, but then there is another thing now to actually truly adopt the cloud native services, right? So there is a lift and shift, and then there is the next step. And I know SBA has done a significant amount of work when it comes to actually taking it to the next level. If you could please enlighten us a little bit more about that.
Sure, and I appreciate the introduction in there. In the past, when we were looking to leverage things in the cloud, of course, there was a large movement towards putting things in the virtual environment, and there's a couple of different things you can do. You can just directly transport things in there. In this day and age, you can replicate almost anything virtually and put it in a different environment, in a virtual environment, but you're still dealing with the same architecture, the same legacy processes, et cetera, if you put it in the cloud. So there was a push to do that at the SBA, and we did that. And fortunately for us, we had done that because when the pandemic hit, suddenly we were asked to expand rapidly and do an awful lot of things. That being in that virtual environment now kind of gave us a lot of the, if you will, it lubricated a lot of the systems so that you could move a lot faster than if we'd had to get rid of things or transition off of old physical platforms and things of that nature. So the difference is that having the things that you've done previously exactly the same way in a virtual environment is a lot different than having transformed everything into a digital environment where now we're really just taking a look at how do we leverage the digital assets there versus what we currently had architected previously. And when we start going down that path, I think you'll hear from some of our panelists in here, they've done a pretty tremendous job of mastering or harnessing all of the data, which when you can start architecting around the data, now you can start transacting that in a lot more efficient and a lot more effective way. So we're midstream journey in that at SBA right now, where we're trying to leverage, okay, we know we have the data, that's a strategic asset. Now let's kind of develop these digital systems that can leverage all of that. You don't necessarily need to move the data. We just need to figure out how we transact that data. And we can do that a lot more efficiently than the old systems, if you will.
Now, thank you for that, Keith. So, of course, the first wave was upgrading the infrastructure, right? Moving to the cloud in the sense, and then doing the lift and shift. And now a lot of modernization in terms of data management and all that. So that's a good segue for me, Alistair, to come to you. Because NIH, NLHBI, of course, is a massive user of data processing and all. I mean, you've been doing petabytes of data forever. If you want to discuss a little bit about your journey in terms of how the cloud adoption has changed some of the things that are happening. And this, by the way, is also a very apt time to ask this, given the COVID situation and how fast the whole innovation happened in terms of the medication and all, I'm sure behind the scenes there was a lot of crunching of data that happened. So, Alistair, if you could discuss your thoughts, please.
Yeah, people don't quite realize just how much, the pandemic response relied on the fact that we've been investing in the cloud for the last 10 years. And we have platforms like the NHLBI's Biodata Catalyst, which is a cloud-based platform, runs across Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform, that brings together those petabytes of data, particularly from our TopMed program, which is the most ethnically diverse genomic data set in the world, 160,000 people with their whole genome sequenced, and leveraging that in the development of vaccines, of drugs, and everything else. There was no way in the world we could have done this if that data wasn't in the cloud. It's just not possible. Similarly, you'll be shocked to know that AI is becoming a big thing in everything that we do. And again, being able to apply complex AI models across those large amounts of data, it's just not tenable. You can, build dozens of racks of GPUs to run your neural networks, and it's still not enough. It's in the cloud, you've got the ability to do it. So it's made fundamental changes to accelerate what we've been doing, to help guide where we're going at every step, whether it's looking at population genetics and the responses to the medications, or just understanding health disparities. What are the causes of them? They've become starkly obvious thanks to the pandemic. They were always there. We just really, really know about them now. And so sort of our next step is to use that data to help address those disparities.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair, for that. Actually, so you brought up AI, artificial intelligence, which of course the base for that is lots of data, whether it's cleansed data or however, there's a lot of training that's happening for the models and all. So actually, we do have Robin with us, and I know, Robin, I have had the opportunity to see some of your YouTube videos also. You've been speaking a lot about AI, containerization. I know you were at the National Gallery of Arts before, you were at the EPA before, and you've been really a big proponent of AI. Maybe if you want to discuss a little bit more about your thoughts on AI, ML, and how you think the government is slowly starting to adopt the whole AI, ML thing.
Thanks, Manish. So I think, thanks for the panelists. I think as Rajiv, Alistair, and Keith was mentioning, when I was at EPA, the driver was us to move the platforms from the on-prem to the cloud, right? So where we saw was let's do lift and shift first so that we can remove our dependency on the data center. Now that we have gotten there, what we have been doing with even my prior team at EPA or at the gallery is starting to think about how do we move that architecture to the next stage. And in this aspect, when we are thinking about more service-based architecture, like the microservice-based architecture, AI is lending itself to be really well there because, AI, what I have seen happening in the field in the last 5 years is AI is not anything new. If you talk to Alistair, he will say that we used to do a lot of these algorithms even 15, 20 years ago. But I think the barrier to entry has gone down really low. Like anybody can start implementing AI systems now. So I think what I am seeing happening is the government being able to access AI solutions, especially algorithms, and train the models much more easy now that we have gone away from our traditional infrastructure-based models that is sitting in the data center into the cloud, right? So that's where I see AI becoming more and more easier for agencies to build services on. And when I was thinking about how to talk about emerging technologies, one of the things I want to share with the group was, I think there is a couple of technologies that is coming around the ledge that I think everybody should start focusing on if you haven't, right? So the cloud being one, and starting to think about how the next evolution of cloud architecture can be used for building a much better efficient system for the public sector is one. Then the second, I think Manish was referring to, is AI and machine learning being the next wave. And if you look past those, there is a couple of other technologies that we should also look at, right? I mean, the question of where the RPA is going to come and play, AR, VR is going to come and play, distributed ledger is going to come and play. And the final one, probably towards the end of my career, would be starting to go into quantum world, right? Quantum computing. So I think that's the way I would look at a sequence of events that is going to happen in the next, I would say, 20 to 30 years on different technologies that's going to come around the pike that we should be heavily investing in.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to come back to you on the quantum side. I know you're passionate about that. And I know where this is all going, probably in the next, 5 years or 1 decade or so. But then I just want to quickly say this to all the small businesses here, right? As I am discussing these things with the senior leaders in the government, what we are looking for here is their thought process as to what they are thinking as they are working towards modernizing their agencies or departments or OpDevs. And that's where the hidden opportunities are. So that's how I look at this, right? So with that, I want to stick with AI for a couple of more minutes. And I want to go back to Alistair. The whole COVID situation, there was, again, a lot of data, a lot of AI that was used. But then also there was a lot of questions posed about the ethical use of artificial intelligence, because of course we also know that things can be done in a very not so conducive way, which can generate results which are not supposed to actually come out in the public. So a little bit thoughts about ethics in AI and how you all are very, very compliant or very strict about all that, Alistair?
Yeah, there are things which you can do and there's the things you should do. And we think about that a lot all the time in health research. You know, we have this framework for ethical, experimentation. And we apply that same framework in AI. We look at the harm that could be done. We look at the benefit to mankind that could come from it. And we make a judgment as to whether it is the right thing to do. Many of our programs have an ethical, legal, and social implications. We've got an ELSI component in them to really look at them pretty closely. And I think, given an example of some of the ethical use, we have to think about biases that may be being introduced by AI. Again, the health disparities from the pandemic. If we respond to that without recognizing that the AI models are frequently trained on data sets that come from predominantly male, predominantly white individuals, you're going to exacerbate those disparities. Even to the point of we're working on a process now we call privacy preserving record linkage, which allows us to identify the same individual across multiple data sets. So, for instance, a participant in a clinical trial for a COVID-related drug and their electronic health records that are existing in a public EHR repository. We've had to think long and hard about how we use that because if you have biases in your ability to link, if it's easier to link certain types of names and other personal data, even though it's privacy preserving, you're introducing selection bias into research. To give you an example, some cultures use we call them reverse naming, first last versus last first. And if you don't account for that in these kinds of things and be thinking about them, you're going to introduce biases. We're starting to do this with AI in a very systematic way. We've actually just launched a really exciting program called Aim Ahead. And what it does is it funds predominantly minority serving institutions, Hispanic institutions, historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, and others that are deeply embedded in these communities that have been impacted so badly by COVID. And we're enabling them to use AI to actually examine the biases in the models, to understand where they're coming from and how we address them, and then apply that to the healthcare of these communities. It takes being very, very intentional to think about all of these ethical issues and just before you push them forward. And we work very, very hard to do that. It can be difficult because there are many opinions about what you should or shouldn't be doing. And so we look for consensus from our research community, from patient advocacy groups. In our recovery initiative, for instance, for long COVID, we've got deep engagement with long COVID patients to help us decide what it is we need to do, what's most important to understand about it in order to meet their needs.
Yep. No, thank you. So let me stick with the AI, same compliance, ethics, everything. If any other panelists would like to add any more thoughts or insights into that, if you are implementing AI, in general about AI or the ethical use of AI, anyone else?
Yeah, I'll inject that, people know, I think the SBA story that when they passed the legislation, the CARES Act legislation, we ramped up, supersized our agency in a matter of like 2 to 3 days.
Yep.
We did more loans in 14 days than we had done in 14 years. And in order to push all of that capital out the door, we ramped up our systems, we pushed things out, and the traditional checks and balances that we would have in the system, our direction was get capital on the streets, which is what we did. But then we had a challenge in there, and that, okay, going back, did we have excessive fraud in there? In taking a look at what went out the door, was there a way, now that the horses had gotten out of the barn, to figure out, should we have held on to some of that? And so AI has been a tremendous asset for our teams as they've gone back and actually gone through, terabytes and terabytes of data to determine, okay, this is a flag, let's take a look at this. So we've been using it extensively for that particular purpose. But, to Alistair's point as well, we were dealing with all of these digital assets, and now the advantage that we have going forward, and I think that Robin hit on this point too, taking a look at how do you take advantage of that to really catapult into the future using that data. In the past, we would do things like maybe we'd build things. We'd say, okay, we do this and we have logic where we go through 4 or 5 steps. We can use AI certainly to jumpstart to another point, and then do things like, whether it's machine learning or robotic process automation, to carry us down the path where suddenly now I can obviate a need for a full person or multiple people, where I can now have them putting their brain power to other activities. So we've been really trying to focus, especially on our loan side at the SBA, on using these particular technologies so that we can free up humans.
Now, absolutely, Keith. So you bring up a good point, which is, of course, risk, fraud, and abuse. And given the pandemic, of course, you have one side of looking at it is the whole loans that were given out. I mean, billions of dollars were given out. Was there fraud there? But I'm pretty sure Robin and Rajiv would also discuss on the same lines the fraud that potentially has happened because of the healthcare, the whole COVID situation, right? A lot of the, as we will get to process this data in the coming few years, I am sure there will be patterns that will be found where multiple claims were filed, providers and, whoever, right? So any thoughts on that from you all, you both, on that, the fraud side? So I'm still sticking with the AI and fraud side of the amount of data that we've collected probably in the last 2 years right now on just COVID.
Yeah. Yes, actually. So in the case of CMS, we actually have a whole center within CMS, which is the Program Integrity Group. And their focus is essentially to go after fraud, waste, and abuse. And they have been using AI for many years now. Over the past few years, we've been, the AI is being used not just in the integrity side of the house within CMS, but many other places within CMS. And over the last couple of years, what we've started doing is started to focus on, well, how do we enable AI to be even better than we are today? We are using AI. We have many vendor partners helping us with machine learning and other AI projects. So we started to focus on, well, can we actually enable them even more by creating taxonomies and ontologies across CMS so that then AI is actually even more powerful if we have access, if the AI systems have access to ontologies and taxonomies. So over the past couple of years, that's one of the areas we've focused on, in addition to sort of creating playbooks of when you want to do an AI project, what should be the framework that you should use to approach an AI project? Because Otherwise, what happens is, given the size of CMS, there are so many simultaneous AI projects going on. We wanted to bring about some consistency across CMS, and that's why we started to go down the path of creating frameworks and playbooks and creating taxonomies and ontologies.
Excellent. Robin, your thoughts?
So I'm relatively new to the healthcare fraud, but I think what I'm trying to do with my team here at the OIG office is working with the rest of the IG's office to understand a bit more about the traditional way of approaching these fraud cases or investigations, so that we can understand, is there an opportunity for us to become more proactive in identifying cases, right?
Correct.
So I think Alistair, to Alistair's point, when we talk about these biases, introduces biases in the AI system, it is typically one of the reasons is the people who are trying to implement AI goes after just the technical aspect of AI, right? They are geeking out on the 3 algorithms they have. I'm going from, this method to this method to this method. I can process 1 million files in 5 minutes and it will give me a model, right? So what I am trying to take the team through is that's not the problem we should be focusing on. First, we need to understand, when we think about healthcare fraud, how are we identifying that from a pure domain standpoint? And then from there, the last journey is picking up the right model and implementing the machine learning that is going to help us, our investigators, identify that fraudulent case. So I think my approach is learn the domain first, and then find out what is the right solution that we have to implement to get the results. And I think, as I was saying in the previous cases, I don't think getting into an AI implementation is no longer as complicated as it used to be when I was in my graduate school, because we had to write our own algorithms to implement it. Now, you go to AWS, Azure, or Google, they already give you the algorithm as a microservice, right? So I think understanding the domain and then starting to identify who has the right solution that we should implement to address the issue. That's the strategy that I'm taking with my team at the OIG.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Robin. And also, finding fraud in general in healthcare is, in general, a tough job, because the data sets are very skewed, because we're looking for a needle in a haystack, right? I mean, there's like only 1% of the records probably just fraudulent out of the whole data set, which is terabytes of data. Now, I mean, previously, healthcare fraud was like, okay, male patients filing for pregnancy tests and all that stuff. I mean, of course, that's fraud, and we can find those patterns, but then there is a lot more that has happened due to COVID. So with that, let me come to data again, right? Because data, again, is the foundation for all this transformation that we are talking about. And I know, Rajiv, you had mentioned a couple of new things that CMS has already started the journey, and I think you were also the chief data officer at one point for CMS, if I remember. I might be wrong, but you mentioned data ops and data mesh. Now, these are two fairly new things that are coming up on the data side. Can you enlighten a little bit more about how you're looking at this data mesh and data? Of course, by the way, data mesh is that data actually sits virtually in its own areas, and then we kind of try to figure it out virtually how we're going to use all that. So Rajiv, your thoughts on that?
Yes. So as you know, in fact, probably all over federal government, we have within CMS a number of centers and offices, and each of them probably has multiple data warehouses, et cetera. And what is obvious is that there isn't much that ties these things together. So anytime you want to go and tie any of them, there's actually a significant amount of work that people end up doing. And what we've been trying to do over the past couple of years is, how do we started with the idea of the data lake, whereby, well, let's at least have one place where we can have access to various sources of data. We were, often you would be in a situation where we say, okay, I need claims data, but there's multiple places where I can get claims data. So what is the source of truth? So that's one of the things we were trying to solve, is make sure we have a source of truth for whatever the kind of data might be, whether it's program data or Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, or operations data within CMS. There should be a source of truth. And secondly, can we make it easy for people to get access to it? Third thing we're trying to also want to make sure is that establish some governance around it. So who's going to own what piece of data? Because there's obviously, if let's say you go to our innovation center, CMMI, they understand their data. So you want to make sure they have ownership over their data. Others should have read access to it, but only CMMI can decide who they want to give access to their data. But so essentially what I'm talking about is having the governance around data, having a single source of truth, making sure once we do that, what that does is it reduces the need for people to just create unnecessary copies of data, which is what was happening. We had 30, 40 different data warehouses, people just creating copies because they didn't know what that was the best and the fastest solution. And that's sort of what we've been trying to get to, is creating the data mesh. Essentially is, yes, there's a data lake, but also at the same time, we don't need to keep copying data. We can point to places. If you want claims data, let's go here. If you want beneficiary data, let's take you here, or whatever the other kind of data might be. That's kind of what we have been working on, and trying to bring about some level of standardization around data. So various centers across CMS can talk to each other, and when one center says, this is what I mean by a nursing home, it is understood what a nursing home is. It shouldn't mean different things to different people. So that's essentially what we're trying to do, is create some standardization around data and establish single source of truth so people can get to the data and establish some governance around it.
So one last thought from you, Rajiv. When you say governance, right? So with the data mesh now, the governance is also distributed. So I'm sure you're probably, how are you looking at that challenge where it's now distributed governance because it's all over the place?
So obviously we use some tools to help us with that. But what is really important is that let's say there's financial data around claims. There is a part of CMS that actually is responsible for the financial data. And we want to make sure that they have ownership. So when I, as a user, say, hey, I want to get access to the financial data, I need to make sure that the financial group actually is the one that says, okay, here is Rajiv asking for this data. Should we give him access to that data? And if we do give him access, what elements should he have access to, and what kind of access should he have? So only people who understand the data should be given the responsibility of how and who should get access and what kind of access. So we are using tools. I think one of the tools we use is Privacera to help us manage the governance around the data lake.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rajiv. So that helps a lot. So same question, I will, if Alistair, you or Keith, if you have any insights, of course, if we look at SBA, there's a lot of small business stuff happening. There's a lot of acquisition efficiencies probably that you're trying to bring, optimizing. Of course, we definitely going into the next decade don't want 100 small businesses to bid when there is only one that will be given out. There's a lot of dollars that get and I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of disparate data sources within SBA and all. Any insights into that, maybe?
We deal with in a different light, deal with the same problems that Rajiv is talking about, and again, I talked earlier about how we kind of lifted all this stuff in these silos in the cloud. So now we have this data in there, and the challenge is, how do you get access to that data so that you can leverage that data? And it almost goes back to, I was at the DoD headquarters after 9/11, and there's several things that happened in there. And one of the things with some of our allies, they said, hey, we need to change our orientation from this method of protecting all data to sharing the data that we ought to share. And when you can share that data, it's a tremendous asset. And I'll be candid with the way that we're operating right now. We have 90 regional district offices all across the United States, and we don't have a way for them to access the data easily, so that if somebody has gone into their office in Wichita, you can't necessarily find out data from that company when they had dealt with the Los Angeles district office, for instance. So that's one of the big challenges we're dealing with, is how do you democratize that data so that the right people can get to the data that they want. And it doesn't matter where you are in our organization, you can actually interface a system such that you can see what someone's history is with the entire agency, if they've got information, whether it's a loan pending, a certification pending, other business pending, et cetera. So we're dealing with the same thing of figuring out, okay, what is it that we want people to have? And then how do we make sure that that's universally accessible to them in a manner that's very easy to digest? And the example I'd use is something like if you've ever seen something for Amazon's customer service window when they pull somebody up. I mean, it's your entire life's history that they've got on there. We want to have that same kind of experience for our people in SBA.
Excellent. So not to put you on the spot, Keith, but is it safe to say for the small businesses in the room that there are a lot of data opportunities coming up with the SBA?
There are a tremendous amount that will be coming up, and that's one of the things that we're looking at is how do we leverage the commercial field out here to see, okay, who's got this expertise? Who's got the $1 million mousetrap idea?
Excellent. Thank you. Alistair, any thoughts on the data before I move on to the next trend?
Yeah, biomedical data is really interesting. It's at a level of complexity which, the normal sort of business data, claims data, whatever, really it doesn't meet. When we talk about data and terminology and making sure that the same terms are used, in biomedical it's even worse. We've got to make sure that something is measured the same way. So, for instance, if you're measuring blood pressure and you've got a clinical trial that measured systolic blood pressure, how was that done? Was it done resting? Was it done standing? Was it done at home? Was it done in the doctor's office? And so this issue of harmonizing the data so that we can bring it together and analyze it together without seeing, statistical effects that are, artifacts from the way the data is measured. We're really looking at ways that we can automate that harmonization. Today, it's done by, experts who look at the data and understand what it is and then bring it together. The National COVID Cohort Collaborative, N3C, has done an enormous amount of work in putting together mechanisms for both syntactic harmonization, getting the data in the same formats, but also for semantic harmonization, making the meanings of them the same. And so this is an area that is very, very important to us because we've got these huge data resources. As you said, we've got petabytes, we've got hundreds of petabytes of biomedical data that we can't bring together because it's not harmonized. So how do we address that? I think there's real opportunity for innovation. We've typically seen it from small businesses to bring their expertise in AI and other methods to this problem.
Absolutely. And also when we talk about health data now, we also have the Apple Watches generating healthcare data and, to get all that together, standardize, harmonize, there's a lot that needs to still happen. It's happening, but maybe there's still a lot more opportunity. So with that, let me move on to another trend, which has been being talked about from last 2-3 years. It has taken a whole new dimension with the whole crypto side. That's the distributed ledger, which Robin mentioned. So blockchain, right? And I know there have been a lot of proof of concepts that have been started. I know CDC has an excellent proof of concept that is going on the blockchain side. I know FDA did an amazing blockchain concept. So Robin, let me come back to you. Why don't you discuss a little bit more thoughts around distributed ledger and blockchain and how you think it should or will get adopted at various agencies, given your background, the EPA and, so please.
Thanks for the question, Manish. I think, when I think about the distributed ledger, right, the collective term that people use for blockchains, right, that technology, at least what I have seen is there is a couple of areas that could be used, right? One is on definitely the concept of smart contracts, which is going to help us to understand who is an owner of a product and how has this been moved from a person to person. For example, when I was at EPA almost 5 years ago, one of the challenges that EPA is going through is, let's say company X produces a toxic waste, and before it gets to the final resting place for that toxic waste, it usually goes from the factory that it produced to a transportation company, and there could be a holding cell, and then eventually it will be transported to the final place where we think is the right place for it to be disposed. So as you can imagine, this process currently is mostly running on paper-based trails, right? So the factory will say that if I go and investigate them, they will say, oh yeah, here is the paperwork that shows that we give this to company X. And the company X will say, oh, here is the paper trail that shows that we give this to this person. So as you can imagine, as an organization that is designed to protect the human health and environment, we have to go and find out this paper trail to find out if this toxic waste has been disposed properly. So this is a classic example that we thought that distributed ledger could help, because we can implement a blockchain or some kind of a distributed ledger capability that will help us to move the contract from, let's say, the factory that produced it to the logistic company to the dumping site, right? So the area of smart contracts is where I believe distributed ledger technology could play a role. And another one that we talked about was even when you buy a car, right? I mean, if you buy a car from BMW produces the car, give it to somebody else, then you get the car finally. So even that one is still on a paper trail. So the question is, the idea of smart contracts that you can get from distributed ledger will be the interesting area that I feel that these capabilities could help us. Now, another area which is relatively new and talked about, and I couldn't find much material on this topic when I was trying to research on, is the concept of identity management, right? One of the things that we are seeing in the world now is most of the fraudulent transactions that is happening is stealing one person's identity and using it in the digital world somewhere else. So there is an application of DLT or distributed ledger technology to transfer these kind of, to create a immutable personal identity in the digital world. Now, foundationally, the biggest challenge with the DLT capabilities that I'm currently seeing, based on where the technology currently stands, is these things are struggling to scale, right? If you are following any of these things, even Ethereum block, they are trying to come up with new ways of making sure that the foundational concept can be still kept. So as a technologist, what I'm watching for is when we talk about distributed ledger, everybody says that the data is spread across the network, you cannot make a change, but that transaction is very costly. So that is the place that I would watch out for, which company or which software giant is going to crack that nut and say that, look, this is the way we are going to still enforce that foundational core of distributed ledger capability, but still give you the ability to scale. I don't think anybody has got that yet, but there is definitely an application for distributed ledger in the public sector.
Absolutely, and there seems to be a lot of opportunities. I was on an advisory panel for Ginnie Mae, and we were discussing how the entire loan process, because Ginnie processes loan, can be fully put on the blockchain, where all the participants are on this private invite-only chain, like the banks and the approvers and the Ginnie, even the compliance folks, of course, HUD and FHFA and all that. So with that, anyone else wants to talk about blockchain before I move on? I know we have only 15 minutes left, so I do have a few more questions, more catered towards the small businesses, but any thoughts on blockchain or distributed ledgers from you all?
Yeah, I will just add, I think that the potential there, we've been talking about it for a long time, right? Blockchain's been out there for many, many years. But when you start taking a look at some of the end-to-end issues that we have in almost any line of business, a lot of them, if you could sit there and actually have some implementation of blockchain in there, I think it resolves a lot of the technical challenges and security challenges that go along with it. So I think there's a huge amount of potential.
No, absolutely, Keith. So with that, let me first ask one or two questions, and then if we have time left, we can come back to the discussion, and then I will open up for question and answers from the audience. Since, as I had mentioned to you all when we spoke last week, a lot of the audience that is here, first of all, I'm looking down, I'm not looking down on my shoes, the monitor is right there in front of me, so I'm just trying to focus on that. So a lot of the audience that's here in the room or who are watching us virtually are small businesses. If you all feel comfortable, can you discuss some of the opportunities that might be coming out in your areas for small businesses to look at, or how should the small businesses prepare themselves going into the next fiscal year, looking at the opportunities coming out of your agencies? And Keith, maybe I can start again with you.
Yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward. We do have obviously a number of different programs for small businesses, whether it's women-owned small business, historically underserved businesses. We are in the process legislatively. We were directed to bring over the service disabled vets program certification process. So that's coming over. There's a lot of activity that's going on. And I will tell you, the leadership in our agency is very forward thinking, and they're looking at how do we change the way that we actually do business for SBA as a whole. Can we standardize on a particular loan platform? Can we standardize on other platforms? So with all that said, we've been very focused on what's been going on with the CARES Act or the pandemic activity, and we're not necessarily coming out of that completely, but it's highlighted that we need to operate better going forward, certainly more efficiently. So there's a huge number of opportunities, I think, over the next 12 to 18 months to do things differently. So for the small businesses out there that are thinking outside the box or thinking that, hey, here's a better way to solve this issue, we are certainly going to be welcoming of that. And I've been pushing our procurement office to let's start getting some RFIs on the street. Let's hear from the small businesses and what ideas they have or how they would solve some of our issues here. I think that those opportunities are going to abound over the next year, and it remains to be seen what comes out of the reconciliation out of Congress right now. But we believe that we're going to have some resources where we can go out there and actually start seeding some money for some of these activities.
And I think, Keith, you had also mentioned a lot of work is going on in terms of RPA, low code, no code. SBA has really adopted all these. So
yeah, and for people that, the great thing about IT is there's so many opportunities in here. Look at this panel, some brilliant people. When you can actually show, as they have, that here's what you do with it, that's what really sings in my heart. When I'm going out there, have you done it? It's one thing to talk about it, but have you done it? If you've done it, I want to get you in. Thank you.
Alistair, I'll go with you next.
Yeah, first let me say, I'm actually a relatively recent incumbent to government. I actually spent most of my career consulting, including for some very small companies. So I have enormous respect for small companies because they have an agility and an ability to go and hire the best and the brightest. And so within my organization, we do a lot of our acquisitions through a blanket purchase agreement that we've been using for the last 10 years. But increasingly, we're finding the specialized skills that we need. There's things which need independence. So enterprise architecture, for instance, we need someone who can oversee what some of these large contractors are doing and define architectures for them. It requires a really special skill set. For that matter, project management, which is just an increasingly difficult to get in the high technology area. You can find project managers, people who understand the technology and can help drive that, are very difficult to find. And those are, I think, real opportunities for us, those kind of independent things, to bring together really, really smart people. Not necessarily with, we've got this methodology or whatever else that, everyone seems to think they want to have. But to say, look, we'll understand you, we'll listen to you, and within 6 weeks we'll be smart. We'll understand your business as well as you do, because that's what we used to do when I was consulting. We recognize that happens, and so for us, that's where I think you should be looking, and with others. How do you bring together the smartest people who are innovative, have some generalists in them, backed by some specialists, to be able to do some of those things that the big companies just can't do. They're too flat-footed.
Excellent, thank you. Rajiv, I'll go with you next.
Sure, I would say there's actually tremendous opportunities at CMS. We are constantly looking for people who can help us with innovative ways to improve our cloud platform, with people who can bring in human-centered design skills and user experience skills, people who can help us on our data journey, standardization, and the mesh that we're working on. So there's just tremendous opportunity at CMS. So I would say that if you are a company that has innovative ideas, has the kind of skills that often the larger providers, companies don't have, I think CMS is a great place for you. There's just tremendous opportunity.
Thank you, Rajiv. Robin, I'll go with you. I know you are fairly new at the OPM OIG, but with your background at EPA and National Arts Gallery, if you can discuss some of the opportunities that you think were there or are still there for small businesses.
I think if you're looking at the immediate opportunities, right, I think where I would focus on is, as all the panelists have mentioned, start thinking about how can you help the agencies to go on their journey in the cloud area, especially now that a lot of the agencies have gone to a place where they have deployed enough applications onto the cloud platform. The question becomes, and I think I didn't use this, I don't think anybody has used this term, containerization, right? So the question becomes, can you go and talk to, let's say, leadership at EPA or NGA or even at the OPM to help them understand how you are implementing the cloud at this point is not the best way. There is a different way where you can improve the abstraction. I think that is an area that still I see a lot of value that the small businesses can bring. And as Alistair was mentioning, or Keith was mentioning, small businesses tend to have a bit more agility than big organization to move. So if you can bring that thought leadership in front of the leadership, and as Keith was mentioning, all of us will be happy to listen to you, right? To talk to us about how the new way of approaching the cloud computing capabilities can help us, especially reducing the cost. Like, right, driving the cost is one of the drivers for all of us, right? So that's an area that I would focus on. On the other side, with the AI, there are two approaches that I would take with respect to coming and talking to people like us if you want to think about AI. One is showing that your team has the expertise in implementing the AI capability, but at the same time, we are also looking for your expertise in understanding the domain, right? Because I talked about this before, like, you cannot just come with a hammer to me and say, I have a hammer, which is AI, show me the place, I will just nail it, right? That's not what we are looking for. We want you to show that you understand the domain well enough so that it's not only your AI capabilities, but also domain expertise is going to be what we are looking for. So I think those are the two areas that I would focus on in the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months. And RPA is there, but I'm not sure where it is in the whole big picture at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin, for that. So with that, I do want to give 5 minutes at least for Q&A from the audience. So if anyone has any questions, you can ask them now to our panelists. Any questions? The mics are right there in the back, actually.
Hi. It's okay, you're okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, Sandy Mestry with Excella Consulting, and thank you. What an amazing panel and the event. It's my first time, so very excited. Can you talk a little bit about, in terms of the skill sets and how you're going about retraining, because these are very specific type of opportunities for individuals and so forth, but what's been successful within your environments about retraining your workforce?
I'll jump in on that. I was going to foot stomp what Alistair said earlier. Getting project management expertise in is so critical, and people that kind of can bring a lot of different things together in that kind of management sphere. You don't have to be the most technical person. That is a skill set that we desperately need. But across the board, the one thing that we've done, certainly in government, we've always been very discreet when it comes to skill sets, that somebody trains to do this, and then we need somebody who can do that. And I get it if we're talking brain surgery, but when we're talking about things like AI, most of those things are commoditized, where there's very few office tools that you have now that don't already have those tools in that you can play around with them. So what I'm looking for in a lot of senses is somebody who has the ability to think on the fly and can adapt. They can see, okay, here's what I've got. How do I adapt that into my environment? So I know that that's probably not a very satisfactory answer, because it's very easy to say, I want that skill set. But boy, the most valuable people I have oftentimes are these people that are multidisciplinary, and they constantly study, and they're constantly looking at what else can I do with this and bring me a wide spectrum of capabilities. Boy, if you got people like that, I'm all in.
I can add a little more to that. I'll give you a little perspective of what we are doing in terms internally. What are the things that we are focused on at CMS to upskill our people at the federal staff? So we are right now on 4 or 5 tracks, and we have the human-centered design track. We have a cloud track, we have a cybersecurity track, product management, and data science. These are the 5 tracks we have as of now that we are having our folks go through and take as courses and get upskilled on. Having said all that, the other thing I would like to point out is, as you probably all heard it, possibly there might be a legislation that allows Medicare to, let's say, negotiate drug prices. Now, what I would love to also have when we get somebody help us implement something like that, like a drug price negotiation, people who come in with user experience kind of thing. So because you could implement the drug negotiation legislation in many different ways, it's right. We need to work together. How do we implement that legislation such that we don't make it too burdensome on all the stakeholders that participate? There are manufacturers or that are going to participate, the pharmacies. How do we actually create a program? So that requires people who have user experience and user research kind of knowledge. So on the CMS side, I would say that besides the technology skills, the user experience and human-centered design skills are of fair importance to us.
Thank you, Rajiv. Any other question from the audience?
Hi.
Okay, one last question. Go ahead, Shiva.
Can you hear me?
One last question.
So one of the areas thank you for all the input, actually. One of the interesting part all of you talked about is the AI. But for a small company to build any compelling AI solution, they need data. And that's where majority of the challenge is. Is there anything you are doing to help small companies to get synthetic data or de-identified data for AI research?
Maybe Alistair, do you want to take this, or Robin, any one of you?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of programs that are working to create data sets specifically for AI. We have a program called Bridge to AI, which amongst other things is looking to create healthcare-based data sets that are hopefully free from bias so that they can be publicly available. It's a difficult task to do for all of the reasons I talked about, the harmonization and everything else. While AI can sometimes be tolerant of a lack of harmonization, it can also lead the models down a wrong path when you're training them. And so I think you make a really good point. And I think you need to be pressing agencies to be making more of their data available and AI ready so that they can start helping us.
Thank you, Robin. Did you have any final thoughts on that?
The only thing I hope that you're already aware of the data.gov, which is not anything new. So that's one place I would start. And I think another thing that is coming up more and more in the conversation these days is the ability to generate artificial data that is probably beneficial for us to show the value of AI. And I think I want to caution there, as Alistair was mentioning this, it's not just generating the data, making sure that you understand the underlying biases or underlying issues that could be introduced because of generating data is going to be the critical aspect of generating synthetic data to build an AI model to show that you can deliver those kind of results. So I think I will start with 2 options. One is data.gov. That should have a lot of publicly available data sets from the federal agencies. Another one is, can you use your expertise to build data set that could be used to train, but that requires a certain set of understanding of potential underlying biases in the data that you generate.
Great, thank you so much, Robin. Look, guys, we could go on and on emerging trends, and with senior leaders like all of the folks we have on our panel, I could go on and on, but unfortunately, we do have to end the panel here. I cannot thank all the panelists enough. If you would be here, I know you're all virtual. If you would be here, we actually had a little bit of a token from TIE DC that we would hand to you, but we're going to mail them to you. So again, all of you, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much for all the information you shared with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.